Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Single Malt Review. I'm Tim, still flying solo on this one, but things have not burst into flames just yet, although we'll touch wood, haha, whiskey joke. Anyway, before this goes further down the toilet, I'm looking at something a bit more commercial this time, a bit more in the commercial circulation than what we usually look at. It is the Naked Grouse. Which is not a new release, but was maybe a year or two ago. It's one of the newer ones from the Famous Grouse blend, I suppose. I could give it that much. And it is, although it's not particularly direct about it, it is the Famous Grouse's entry into the increasingly crowded cavalcade of releases around the sherry matured whiskey thing. The whole idea that sherry matured whiskey is rare and special and worth paying money for, which is probably, you call it, tenuously accurate thing to say, depending on the quality of said whiskey. But anyway, this is the Famous Grouse's entry into that competition. It's really, without being particularly overt about it, it's their version of the Chivas Regal Extra. That's, in fact, I think I do. Oh dear. That's this one here. If you remember that particular review, that's probably a year old now, so you'll have to scroll down. You'll have to scroll down quite a wee way to find that one, but never mind. This is round about the same pitch, and that's one of the very few things the you'd call it minimally presented bottle does tell you. There's some suggestion here even that this may have been re-racked and finished in what could even be unused sherry casks. I wasn't able to find out myself. If anyone can correct me, then please do. But the whiskey itself, other than that, is really fairly standard. I can be fairly sure that it's coloured. I know it's chill filtered, and it's 40%. So it's not really making any great forays into the new frontiers of craft whiskey. But never mind, that's not probably why people buy Famous Grouse blends. Looks pretty good on the shelf though, I'll give you that much. Probably looks quite nice behind your bar. So, does it stand up? That's the question. And you know, I think it's not actually all that bad. It does stand up, especially when you compare it to some of the maybe less careful, sort of big sherry bomb type blends. And I'll get into why as we go further down the glass here. What this one is, and I think why this one is better, is because it is subtle. Subtle in a way that many of these things aren't. Neither the colour, artificial as it may be, nor the aroma and nor the taste screams sherry. Chivas Regal Extra, that Prohibition Edition blend from, what was it, Cutty Sark that we tried, those things scream sherry. They have one note to hit, and they really yell to get there, to try and be as advertised. This one doesn't. This one's more of its own identity, which makes it quite a lot better to drink, in my opinion. There's a lot more than just sherry notes on the nose. It's more of a sherry influenced dram than a sherry dominant one, and it does it a lot of favours as a blend, because blends are all about the middle ground. If a blend goes too far one way or the other, it usually stops being a very good blend, because it's kind of diverged from the ethos of the whole thing. But anyway, more on that later, maybe, if I go into that diatribe. So, on the nose, it's quite savoury as well as sweet. And that's really good, because sherry finished whiskies, the problem they often suffer from is an overly sweet nose, this sort of veneer of sugar which has been painted over the top of them, this overly sweet sort of too much dried fruit, too much sugary business on them. This one, it has those nice rich sweet notes, but it has a slightly salty, even slightly maritime, savoury salt caramel element to it, which saves it from getting a bit sickly, which is very much the trap that Prohibition Edition blend really fell into when we reviewed it. There was just too much going on in that department. Additional to that, there's a lot of wood, quite a lot of fresh, active oak wood as well, be that from fairly less than well-used bourbon or sherry, or probably a mix of both. I don't know. It could be what they've re-racked it into for the finishing, I suspect. But there's a very keen, fresh, new oak flavour in there. There's dried fruit. There's just a little smokiness. But it is detectable and welcome, because that dries out that aroma as well, stops it being too sweet. And aside from that, it's none too complex. There's your usual Speyside characters, apple, pears, so on and so on, but they're in practically every blend on the shelf, so who cares at a certain point? They're there, and they're fine. But no, not too complicated, but then again, it shouldn't be. The palate is significantly sweeter. For a 40% whiskey, it's really quite snappy. It tastes stronger than it is. If you'd fed this to me, I would have said, well, that's a 46% blend. It's one of these sort of modern ones where they're giving you a bit more in the bottle, but no, it's not. It's 40%. So, whatever whiskey is in here, and it will certainly be a mix of old and young, the young is really quite, it's very spirity and punchy, but not in a particularly unpleasant way, just in a very lively way. It's quite a fiery dram. There's heather honey, quite a lot of Speyside characters, and it's really only towards the end, not right on the end, but towards the end is when the sherry starts to make itself known. That rich vanilla that you get from sherry butts or sherry hogsheads, from sherry bud, European oak, is particularly evident and slightly hard to peg, because you also get vanilla from bourbon, but it's a different kind of vanilla. It's a lighter vanilla, and usually comes along with those more subtle coconut flavours. Vanilla from European oak, no matter what the cask has been, sherry or otherwise, although they're usually sherry, is a far sort of deeper, darker vanilla, more of a vanilla essence or vanilla syrup or something like that. And that's what's in this one. So the sherry is certainly expressing itself, but it is far from dominant. There's that light salt caramel is still there. There's very little subtle flavours. Though nothing is particularly dominant, there are no sort of intriguing threads winding their way through that. There is no floral characters to this whatsoever. It is not a herbaceous or floral whiskey in any way. It is very much about the wood and very much about the spirit, which is fine. I think it could have used just a hint of that, but never mind. It has some sweet acetone coming through from that young spirit, and after that I'm really starting to really scrape the extent of what's there. Like I said, it's not a complex whiskey, but I think very few people would be buying it anticipating a complex whiskey. There's a few honeyed nuts in there as well. Honey peanut, mostly honey peanut. A little bit of caramel popcorn as well. So there's certainly more than a little bourbon in there. It's by far from a sherry exclusive whiskey. But the overall impression is pretty pleasant, and it's pretty balanced. It's not gone silly with the sherry, which some do, far too many do, I think, in this day and age. It's careful about what it's doing. You could enjoy it as not a sherry whiskey just as easily as you could something marketing itself as that. So whether that's going to help or hurt them in terms of selling bottles, because people, sherry fiends out there, like Dave is a bit of one of those himself, really, really looking for those sherry characters exclusively, aren't really going to like this. They're going to have some and be like, well, where's the beef, so to speak. But I think they're just careful enough with the packaging and the marketing here that they don't go all out with the saying that this is a sherry matured whiskey and this is all it is. That's very much the tagline for the Shivers Extra and so forth. But so I think you'd consider this a alternative Famous Grouse rather than a sherry flavoured Famous Grouse, which works for me. May not work for everybody, but who knows? Scores wise, I think this one works for me about as high as a 77, and just right here, and this would have been some really good, easy research to do. I can't remember what my score for the Shivers Extra was. I think this is just a little bit better. I think the Shivers wasn't bad, but this is just a bit more complete, I think. This is the one I would go for. They are more or less the same price. I think the Shivers might be just slightly more expensive, but don't quote me on that. It will depend on the marketplace as well. I will now have to go back and see what my score for that one was. So if there's a really embarrassing edit in there, then that was my fault. So never mind. So anyway, Famous Grouse, the Naked Grouse. Slightly odd name, I think. I think they could have probably spent an extra 5 minutes in that board meeting thinking of a better name for that, but never mind. I will find something maybe a bit less commercial for the next one, I think. In fact, I think I've got just the one in mind. So buckle in, and you won't believe what's coming next. Here you go, big talk, Slanjo.